We're in Springfield, Massachusetts,
Oh,
at the home of...
it's Harry Aizenstat at 66 East Alfred Street in the Forest Park section of Springfield.
And how do we spell your name?
A-I-Z, as in zebra, E-N-S-T-A-T.
And you're being filmed for the Jewish Historical Society of Western Massachusetts for posterity.
Thank you. I appreciate that. At our age.
And what is your
And
name?
I'm Sarah Aizenstat, Harry's wife, and I live with him at 66 East Albert Street, Springfield, Mass.
And what is your maiden name?
Friedman.
And where's
Accountant.
your family from?
Well, originally,
Where are you raised? Where were you raised?
I was raised right here in Springfield. My parents came to Springfield in 1905, and my father was brought here by Rabbi Rappaport, who was the chief rabbi at that time, to be a chazan and a shechet at the Beth Israel Synagogue, which is then on Grays Avenue. And my family's lived here ever since.
Where did they come from?
Originally, they came from Lithuania, but Lithuania, as you probably recall, went back and forth to Russia. So I think when they came, at that time, it was under Russia. And there I have on the wall there, I have a copy of my father's passport, and a copy. And I took his picture. I had a photographer take his picture off of his passport, and I had it put on the.
Was he recruited by Rabbi Rappaport? How did Rabbi Rappaport find your father to make him a cantor?
That's the question. Harry and I were talking about that. We think that they may have had an office in New York. We think that an office for rabbis who come into New York, and probably I know my father had very sound recommendations, and I have some of them here. His original, go find it. But I do have some recommendations for him. Very high recommendation. At one time, I showed it to Rabbi Weisvogel, and I asked him if he would
Translate.
what?
Translate.
Yeah, for me. And so he looked at it. You better take this off. He looked at it and he said, "Well, everybody gets compliments, so that it was very complimentary, but he thought that probably it was a little exaggerated. I don't know. But at any rate, whoever knew him in those early days said that he was a very talented chazan, shechet, mol. He was known as the Yankee Clipper up and down the Connecticut Valley, because they would come to pick him up from the small towns, and they all knew him. As a matter of fact, when I was born, my mother told me that he was at a bris, and he wasn't home at that time.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
Yes, I had 3 brothers, and I was the youngest, and I'm the only one in the
Could
family.
give us their names?
I'm sorry?
The names?
Okay. My oldest brother was Rabbi Jacob Friedman. As you probably know, he was the author of
Sure, the Haggadah.
the Haggadah.
Oh, that's your
And
brother.
then my second oldest brother was S. King Friedman, Samuel Friedman. He was a lawyer in town, and also he helped my father in the monument business.
In the what
When
business?
When we all went off to college, it meant the income from being a sheikh and the chazan was very minimal, and so he had to supplement his income, and so he went into to the monument business. It was
Gravestone monuments, is that what you mean?
Oh yes, yeah. Yes, I have some things upstairs I can show you.
Okay. And Martin.
And then the third brother was my brother Martin, and that's my brother Martin there.
Uh-huh.
Martin was a brilliant student. He was a graduate of Central High School at that time, at the age of 15. My folks wouldn't let him go off to school. He was accepted at Harvard at that time, but my folks thought it was a little bit too young for him to go off, and so he took a postgraduate course at Central High, and then he went off to Harvard, and he was in the pre-med course. As I said, he was a brilliant student. Unfortunately, he was coming home on his summer vacation just after he had completed. He was going into his junior year. He just completed his final exams, and he came home. He came down with an attack of appendicitis. And at that time, this was 1928, and at that time they had no antibiotics. And at the age of 18, he died. And so I have letters that were written to him just prior to this happening, and his math teacher, I think it was Smith, was very interested in him, and he kept urging him, Martin, don't take care of yourself, don't neglect yourself. But he did. For his studies. And I have a letter from, I think, the president of Harvard saying that no one has ever excelled his record at the time that he passed away.
Tragic.
And so he was going into his junior year. So that really hit the family very hard. And all I can say is my folks tried very hard not to show their their pain, but how much can you hide?
Where did you go to school, and what did you end up doing in terms of work?
Where did he go to school?
Where did you go to school?
School?
And what did you do to make a living for
I was a
yourself?
social worker, and I went to Simmons. I got my master's and my master's
MSW,
there.
yeah. What year were you?
And I worked for one agency was Jewish. I worked for the Jewish Social Service during the war years, and I helped with the resettlement of the newcomers, we called them, at that time. And then I went back to Simmons for my master's. I had my bachelor's then, so I went back to Simmons for my master's. And when I came back, I went to work for the Child and Family Service. That was, we did adoptions and various things. And then when I got married, I retired.
Let's take a break. Let's see who's responsible for the retirement. There we go. That's you, Harry. Would you like to start back a little bit and catch us up to this point?
Well,
Where
a little
you're
bit
from?
about my personal history.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I was born in Chicopee, and I mean my family lived in Chicopee at the time. Moved to New York for 2 years, then to West Springfield, graduated from West Springfield High School, went to American International College, received my master's degree from Clark University
In what?
in history, and thought I would be a teacher, but there are no teaching jobs available. So I ended up at the Springfield Armory and worked as in administration, also as a purchasing agent. And when the Armory was to be scheduled to be shut down in '68, in '66, I transferred to Westover Air Force Base, and from there I retired in 1973, and I've been retired ever since.
What did your father do for a living?
Well, my father was in the meat and grocery business, and he was from Lithuania. My mother died at a relatively young age, in her early 40s, and my father died in 1962. I had one sibling, my brother Arthur, or Albert, and we both served during World War II. He was in the Navy, I was in the Army. And after he got out of the Navy, he went to optometry school and became an optometrist in Weymouth. And he died at a relatively young age. He died when he was 45 of a brain tumor. And I went back into the service for the Korean War in 1950 and served till 1952. I served in this country. I didn't go overseas. But there were a number of Jewish individuals in my unit. I was with the 915th Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, and the commanding officer was a Dr. Grover, who was Jewish. We had a Dr. Jonas, and he came with us. And in the enlisted personnel, there was Max Kay, Joe Heller, Newman Ehrlich, Freddie Garber, and a couple of others whose name I forget at the time, but we were sort of a Jewish outfit.
Can we take you back both for a moment to growing up Jewish in Springfield? What was it like being Jewish back in the 20s or the 30s?
Okay.
What can you remember about the
Yes,
community?
I can remember very well. When we moved back to this area, actually West Springfield in 1924, my father immediately sent me to the Talmud Torah, which was then on 10th Street. I went down the street that no longer goes. And we would go I went 4 afternoons a week plus Sunday morning. And we had the Rebbes, and quite often we were taught to the tune of the hickory stick. I mean, it was not unusual to get a potch here and there, but, and we were also, the unusual part about it, talk about bilingualism, we were taught the Chumash to translate it into the Yiddish, not into English, but the Yiddish. We were also taught how to read and write Yiddish. And
Is that what you spoke at home?
no, at home. At home we spoke, my parents could speak English, but there was an intermingling of both languages. But as I say, I've sort of bragged that essentially at the school there, at the Cheder, we had Yiddish, we had Hebrew, and we had English. And this was, and to this day
What years are we talking about?
I went from 24 to 29. I was bar mitzvah in 1929. Just before I was to be bar mitzvah, my father took me out, and there was a group of us that were to be bar mitzvah about the same time. There was Irving Lipovsky, later Irving Lipo, Mel Lipo's brother from the travel agency, and there was a boy named Asher, and there was another fellow called Frank Umansky, U-Man, who later became a lawyer. And we were all to be bar mitzvah at the same time. I was bar mitzvah at the Beth Israel in 1929. And then shortly, now we're going to get into my association with Kesser Israel. About 1932 or 33, for some reason or other that my father never told me, we became associated. He became a member of Kesser Israel. Now, Kesser Israel at that time was located on the corner of Chestnut and Franklin. It was a converted mansion. The main sanctuary, if you want to call it, was where the men sat, was on the ground floor. And then I don't know how they did it, but they had a balcony, and that was for the women. And I could imagine that this was all pews, it wasn't theater seats. And I think it must have held between men and women, it could have held about 250 people, 200 people possibly. And we were supposedly under the jurisdiction of the chief rabbi of the Orthodox community, which at that time consisted in the north end of Beth Israel, B'nai Jacob, which was Orthodox, Kesser Israel, and B'nai Israel, or the Rosh Hashanah. And we didn't have a rabbi, but we did have a chazan. We had, when I went there, we had a chazan Levine, who later went to Beth Israel. We had another individual whose name I don't recall. But we were, and sort of in the back was a kitchen cum vestry, because that's where we davened during the week. And it also had, as I said, a stove there, and breakfast was served at all times.
Which shul is this now?
This is Kesser Israel.
Kesser Israel.
It was on the corner of Franklin and Chestnut. It
Right.
was set back. It was about, I would say, about 30 feet back from Chestnut Street, and in the rear was a large lot that was never used. But the leaders at the time was Mr. Eisenstein, who was the father of Dr. Samuel Eisenstein. There was Mr. Knitsky, the father of Aaron Kern, and Mr. Knitsky's brother. I think that was Ike Knitsky. I forget the name of the other Knitsky. There was Mr. Chaffetz, Mr. Rickless, he was in the burlap business, burlap bags and so forth. And Mr. Cohn, who was a peddler, and Mr. Margolis. Actually, the leadership and the membership consisted of peddlers, some tradesmen, and some businessmen. And it was open twice for Shacharis and Ma'ariv, and for the high holidays. I didn't attend on Shabbos because at that time we were living in West Springfield. I was young, and then later we moved to the Six Corners area. But it was a very friendly show. Oh yes, I should mention that there was Mr. Chernak, who had a butcher shop, and the father of Harold Chernak. Those were the leaders back in the 30s and the 40s. Came to the 60s, at that time Urban Renewal reared its head in Springfield, and B'nai Jacob was taken over, and we were taken over, which meant that we had to find another place. We were thinking in terms of erecting a synagogue, I think out in Allen Street, but we were also interested in Kadima, which at that time it was building a new synagogue on Sumner Avenue. And I guess when we approached them, they were not anxious to have competition. So when they did sell, they sold it to the Lubavitch. Rabbi David Edelman took over, and he had the big shul, the big sanctuary on his hands, plus the adjoining school, which was originally, it was the forerunner of the Heritage Academy.
Is that or is it the forerunner of the yeshiva?
Well, the building was the forerunner. The building, when it was built, was became the forerunner of the Heritage Academy. When he took it, by that time, they found another structure on Maple Street, and they took over a big home. But when he took it over, then that became their yeshiva.
Right.
Did the people from Kesser join this shul? You said that it was given over to Edelman, but did most of your members then join?
No, the point is, we bought it from Edelman. We bought the shul from Edelman. The money that we received from Urban Renewal
Right.
enabled us to buy the shul from him,
Yeah.
and also to renovate the shul, because it had nothing when we got there. We were on Kadima had removed pretty near a good share of the pews that they had. What you see today in the synagogue is the doings of the Kesser Israel. It was we had to clean out the entire main sanctuary. We put in the theater seats. We put in the bima as it is. Now, when we got there, we took over the building in '65. In '66, we completed renovations. At that time, Rabbi Sheinkoff, who was Beth Israel, wanted to have his son take over the Beth Israel pulpit. In the meantime, B'nai Jacob had built their synagogue where it is today behind the Jewish Community Center. And he became their rabbi. And he also, and Kalman Chaitovsky, whose family was associated with the B'nai Israel, the Rosh Hashanah, went along with him as the cantor. Then there was a problem there. I'm not too familiar with the problem, but then they decided to become conservative. When they decided to go conservative, the only place that Rabbi Shankov had to go was to Keser Israel, and he became our rabbi, and Cantor Chaitovsky, who was essentially, who was Orthodox, did not want to stay at a conservative synagogue, and he came along with them, and we had them. Rabbi Shankov was our rabbi for several years, but then he became older, and he had the problems of being older, and at that point we gave him a small pension, a very small pension, and he left us, and we then hired Struli Edelman as our rabbi, and he's been the rabbi ever since. And of course, Cantor Chaitovsky stayed on until his death. And
When was that?
I have it in my book somewhere. He died.
Is when the old man Chaitovsky died? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that, no, the
When
Cantor,
the Chazan died.
died. I have it here.
Chaitovsky.
Yeah,
It's okay. It's okay.
Kalman.
We'll get it later.
We'll get it later. We'll
Okay.
piece it together.
When Kalman died, that was the end, and we stayed on. What's his name? Struli has acted as Chazan, and I think he died about 5 years ago.
So with the community at Keser Israel, when Sheinkopf was there, what were the numbers?
We never had more than, well, let's call them membership 150. In fact,
150 families?
Families, I would say 150 families. But it's gone down ever since. I mean, the community changed, demographics entered the picture, and all the Orthodox synagogues, our membership has declined. Fortunately, I will say this, we've had, for a while there, we had the Hafitzes, and we had a couple of other families, Nathan Lapinas, and they were generous to the shul. In the last 10 or 15,
Tell them about yourself, Harry. How many years have you been in charge of the cemetery?
Okay. Okay, I'll talk about that later. That's a white for you, isn't it?
Is there a Stockhausen family? Do I have it right?
Stockhammer.
Stockhammer family?
Well, the Stockhammer, Eileen Stockhammer is a Rabinowitz. And the Rabinowitz have been associated with these, her grandfather was associated with the shul way back in the beginning. And her brother's High Rabinowitz. And thanks to him and Jerry Steinberg and Elon, in the last few years, we've been able to maintain our financial status. My association, as I say, goes back to the 30s. I was secretary, recording secretary. I was an officer in the men's club at the time. And I've also been the gabbai at the cemetery since 1973, up until the present time. I buried over 200 people.
So Keser has its own cemetery from the same one that they had when they were in the North End.
That's right.
Where is it?
There are 3 cemeteries located on Wilbraham Road. I understand that the land originally was bought by Keser Israel, and they needed money, so they sold off a portion of the land to the city of Homs. And a third portion they sold off to the Sons of Israel, or the Rosh Hashanah. So if you go up there now, going eastward, the first cemetery, there are 3 buildings up there, 3 small buildings. The first building is the city of Homs. The middle building is the Kesser Israel, and the third building is the Sons of Israel.
What's in the building?
They were supposed to be like chapels and where the bodies were prepared, I understand. And we never had it done here. At one time, there was no Jewish undertaker. And it wasn't until Harold Asher came to the Springfield community after the war, after World War II, that you had a Jewish undertaker. The undertaking used to be done by a man named, well, not all the time, but it was Forestier, an Italian undertaker, But the preparation, I understand, of the bodies and so forth, that's where the bodies were supposed to be prepared.
It hasn't been that way for a long time?
I've been associated with since '73, and it hasn't been done.
There's no Chevra Kadisha,
I'm the Chevra Kadisha.
but the men don't get together, it's done by Asher.
Well, the Chevra Kadisha really consists, you'll find an explanation of the Chevra Kadisha is really of 2 groups in a sense. The people who perform Tyra, the preparation of the body, and the people who are responsible for the cemetery and all the other things. If you look in that explanation, my translation of the
Bylaws.
you'll get an idea. And essentially, we are 3. One of the differences I have with this man Reisman from the, he says, we're not Chevra Kadisha. I says, we certainly are. He thinks in terms of the Chevra Kadisha as being
Just
the
Tahara?
Tyra,
Right.
the preparation of the body. And
It's
they are
only
not.
one part of it.
That's one part of the burial procedure is the cemetery and the preparation of the body.
Mm-hmm.
Quite often, I think members of the Chevra Kadisha who are responsible for the cemetery will probably also perform Tyra. But the Tyra in this community for a good many years was performed by the Tchaikovsky brothers.
That constitution, what we call it, of the Kesser Israel, is a gem. Harry translated it from the Yiddish, and he burned plenty of midnight oil. And what is so interesting about it is the compassion of the members for each other, and it's written so humanely, And I think sometimes people forget in the business of running the synagogue, they forget the main purpose of the synagogue, and so I love that translation that Harry did. And
Can we go back for a moment
Yeah.
to the north end?
Right.
Can you recall urban renewal when it came?
Yes.
Can
It came
you-
in the 60s.
Can you recall this?
oh yeah,
We're in the 60s.
Okay, can you give me a sense of what the reaction of the Jewish community and the rabbis, the organizations, did they just say, okay, it's urban renewal, we're moving? Or did they fight it?
No, it was never fought.
So all the Jewish folks just moved out?
There were only 2 Jewish synagogues affected. Beth Israel was not affected. The Sons of Israel, which was then on the corner, practically on the corner of Jefferson Avenue and
between Bancroft.
between Bancroft on White Street, between Bancroft and Jefferson Avenue, was not affected. There were only 2 Jewish, and at that time the Jewish community was disappearing. The North End. Listen, Sarah's mother died in '65, and she was still living there. But the Jewish had moved to the park, and from the park it was moving to Long Island.
Also, Harry, they moved up closer to the Shriners Hospital in that area, Narragansett Street. So there was a nucleus of Jews there.
But the trend was downward.
It was already happening.
It was already happening.
We called them the Electicus, the ones who were able to move to Forest Park in that area. And there was a schism. I mean, there was they were the higher toned and we were the lower toned.
But actually, by 65, when in the 60s, the trend was definitely down. I mean, there were still a number of families left there, but the future was
Because
not.
I remember growing on
She was a North End girl, I wasn't.
Yeah.
and the shopping area,
Can you give me some
the
of the,
butcher shops.
can you name some of the people, the shops that were there? Can you remember the names?
Ruby Burstein, the Bursteins brothers were at the butcher shop.
Well, no, they were on Ferry Street. You have to talk about.
Well, they started on Ferry Street and then they moved to the
park.
north end.
No, well, sir,
To the-
let me
and then
interrupt.
later on to the park.
Let me interrupt. Let me interrupt at this point. In the 20s, the Jewish shopping, to a great extent, was on Ferry Street, which no longer exists. And that became a casualty of urban renewal. There were the Burstein brothers, there was Weinberg the butcher, there was Fagan the fisher.
Fagan the Fisher? He had his own.
Yeah, there was a fish store there.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, that's where you got your carp and other fish for gefilte fish. There was Schneider's Delicatessen. There was Magaziner's Bakery
And Benny's.
and Benny's Delicatessen.
And that was known all over, Benny's Delicatessen.
Benny, and I'll tell you, I used to, when I went to Cheder, when I first went to Cheder, I was 8, so there was this Dora Margolis, who lived in West Springfield, and she went to the Cheder too. There were a number of girls at the time. In fact, in my class, there were about three or four girls. One of them still alive, M11.
I went to Mr. Moses's Hebrew school. That was on White Street. That was.
And so she had to do the shopping for her family, so she would take me. We went down to Ferry Street, and that's how we became at Ferry Street. Also had Wallman, and it had a dry goods store, Schneider's Delicatessen, which was excuse me, I don't believe it was any wider than this room, and it was a beautifully kept store. He sold deli, and then he also had a couple tables. But that was the extent. Benny's, on the other hand, was a regular delicatessen where you went in to eat. And I remember when I would travel with Dora Margolis, I'd go by to go to Main Street to get the bus or the trolley. I would pass by Benny's, and he had a pan of baked beans, and on the other side were hot dogs on the griddle. And I would look in there,
And tell me about Magaziners.
A Magaziner. In their window, they had cupcakes, and they had.
Oh, those cupcakes! How we used to drool. I don't just. Do they make them anymore?
Yeah, they do. And
Was this all kosher? All these places?
this was the kosher.
Oh, that whole area was strictly.
Totally kosher.
This is where everybody came to shop.
Yeah, there was a few streets. Now, around the corner from Ferry and White was Woodland's Creamery. And there they sold cottage cheese and other things, mostly cottage cheese. But then along Dwight Street, there were other stores. But the main shopping area in the 20s, there were a couple of butcher shops further down. But the main shopping area was Ferry Street. And that's as I say, they had the bake shop, had a deli, had a fish market, and had several butcher shops.
And this was the Jewish.
And also had a restaurant. It was funny, a white table.
The Romanian.
A white tablecloth restaurant called, I think, the Old Romanian. Now I'm really having to go way back, but it was there, and it didn't probably close later in the 30s or something like that.
The Jewish community surrounded this shopping area? Was it?
No, the funny part about it was Ferry Street, in a sense, was against the railroad tracks. It was about 2 streets over from the railroad tracks.
But Jewish families lived there originally.
But going down, heading north, there was Congress Street. There was what else? 10th Street.
10th Street.
And Franklin Street and Greenwood Street.
Dwight.
And that's where the Jews,
original North End.
the Jews lived there originally, and then they moved again further north. Now, your family,
My family started on Greenwood Street. That was down, not too far from Ferry Street. And then they moved, when they got a little more settled, they had a little more financial security, then they moved up to Calhoun Park area, across from the park. And that was, that was coming into your own. And later on, they moved to Forest Park area, the Jews.
But you would still go back to Ferry Street when you
Originally, my folks told me, this was before I was born, they told me that when they came to Springfield, originally they lived for a short time on Ferry Street. So families did live there. The immigrants settled there, and they had their stores around them. Then they began to branch out a little bit, as they became more secure, more financially successful. And then my folks, again, this is before my time, not Greenwood Street, Gray's Avenue is where the synagogue was. That was, Beth Israel started on Gray's Avenue. And and the Jews settled
nearby.
around that. In fact, I have a picture of my brother Sam, my middle brother's bris, and the whole Jewish community is what there was, the membership, here, is attending his bris. And my cousin said to me one time, well, where's your mother? Well, at that time, they didn't go out in crowds. Mama was with the baby in the house, and that's where the bris took place. But the guests were all outside. And some of my relatives who were youngsters at that time are in that picture. So it's kind of precious to us.
well, as long as this is more than a Kesser Israel story,
Oh, yeah.
her family is it's not my family, but she can tell you about her family because they are involved with the history of Springfield. I mean, you tell them about the aunts.
What else can I tell you?
Tell us
About the
about your
Frankels, about the
Huh?
The Frankels.
and the Levines.
Oh, well, my mother was one of, was it Forrest? That's my mother. And this is when they came to Springfield. I think I might have enough. And that one, that's at the same time. And this is my oldest brother,
Well, that one-
Jacob. And that's the rabbi.
What's the rabbi's name? Do you remember?
My
Oh, your
oldest
father.
brother.
Oh, your-
My father and my brother.
And then that's a picture of me. My
This
my
is
brother.
Harry's family.
That was
This is
taken.
Harry.
That was taken in Brooklyn when we lived in Brooklyn.
What is this one?
Tell us
Sarah.
about this one again.
Excuse me?
This picture. You said it's a rabbi?
Oh, this is my father. This is when they first came to Springfield, so I'd say this was about 1906. And my mother and my brother Jacob, her firstborn child. He's the one that, that's my
Can you give
grandfather.
that to Jane to take a picture of?
This is my grandfather,
So your mother's father?
my mother's father.
And who is this?
That's my brother Jacob at his bar mitzvah. You get the whole family.
Of course.
When you're speaking, actually, Sarah's a daughter of a pioneer.
Who's this?
I can remember,
That's her brother at his bar mitzvah.
So that's about 1918.
Jacob?
Yeah.
And this is Harry's family in Brooklyn, and that's Harry.
And my brother.
I can remember the Chazonim, the cantors, having a meeting at our house.
Which one is Harry here?
Tall and right.
I'm the tall one.
The tall,
I'm the
thin
older
one.
one.
And who is this?
That's my father again.
That's your father. Give me his name again.
Huh?
What's his
Joseph.
Joseph.
Joseph Dove.
Joseph Dum Ben Rachmiel.
Now, when you say her family's pioneers, what do you mean?
Well, they came over in 1905. They were
Well,
in Springfield in 1905.
It was before a lot of organizations, so that families helped each other.
When did they bring a rabbi in?
Excuse me?
When did they bring a rabbi?
Rappaport? I don't,
No,
because
I
it was
understand,
prior.
1899 or something like that.
It might be in that,
A book.
Okay, we'll look.
you
Yeah.
have it.
So what do you remember of this rabbi?
Rappaport.
I'm sorry.
Can you remember Rabbi Rappaport?
Vaguely. I can remember him vaguely. My best friend was his granddaughter.
She was from
So,
Northampton.
the families were very, very. I was just telling my husband the other day about their daughter Rachel. They called her Rachel de Lobs. And she settled after she was married, apparently she settled in Worcester. But she used to come back and visit the Friedmans, and she would visit, because at that time, the chief rabbi was held in great esteem here. And she had a wide range of friends, from the very wealthy to the very humble, who all respected him. I also remember the rabbi from Holyoke, as a Talmud Chochem, how people would come and really worship at his feet. They were so respectful. I went there one Saturday with my family, Saturday night with my family, and the wealthiest people in the community came to visit with him. He was as poor as a church mouse. The house, there was hardly a whole chair to sit on, but they came and paid their respects. I used to wonder why they didn't pay a little more money.
What was the name?
What was this rabbi's name in Holyoke?
From Holyoke was Rabbi, God, isn't that awful?
It'll come to you.
It'll come back.
All right, but tell them about your mother's family here. Then.
My mother's family.
Yeah.
See, her maiden name was mother's maiden name was Sakowitz.
Oh, she's got a whole family tree here, Sarah.
And she was one of 5 sisters, and these are the early pictures of the sisters.
You found the treasure trove here, Harry?
I have several copies of that, so you can have that if you
Oh,
want.
wonderful. Thank you.
Well, continue, sir, with your story.
Tell us
Continue with
about
this
your
one.
family, your sisters.
Your sister.
After they settled here in Springfield?
Oh, your family brought him in.
Oh, yeah, they were the first ones to come. And the family settled in New York. Actually, her siblings and her father and her mother settled in New York. So Springfield was like the country. You would come here for your vacations. So my aunts would come and visit my folks and stay for their summer vacations. Little by little, the oldest one, Mrs. Levine, the oldest one was married and living in New York. She was married already when my folks came to Springfield. She was the oldest one. Then came Mr. Sakowitz, who was a Balkria, and my father brought him here and got a job for him to read the Torah, to fix the Torah at Beth Israel. So they came at that time. Mrs. Levine and Mr. Levine followed with their 2 older sons. There were 3 sons at that time who came to Springfield. They lived on Greenwood Street, that I know. Then Mrs. Frankel, the Frankels, Mrs. Frankel got married, and she came to Springfield.
Myers.
Mrs. Myers. Mrs. Myers, my mother fixed up. My mother was a shadchan. When they first came to Springfield, they were practically penniless. I don't know what my father earned. It was $6, 6 in my mind. So my mother kept boarders. This was not unusual in those days. But, if somebody was looking for a kosher home and where to stay, they'd stay at the Friedmans. So she had a very nice boarder, a Mr. Myers. And she noticed every morning he'd get up, he'd like to fill him. So she had a single sister. So she said, well, this would be a good one for my sister. So she brought her sister from New York. And anyways, that was consummated. And so the Myers had 9 children. So they were very prolific. And you probably heard of the Myers brothers in Springfield.
No, the accountants.
The accountants. The brothers became a very successful.
They're now with Calico up there in
very
Stuart Myers.
If you go to those buildings in Long Meadow, some of those big office buildings, Benny Myers calls me. He now lives in Florida, but he calls me periodically. And I said to him one day, we were in a doctor's office in one of those buildings in Long Meadow, and I said to Harry, you know, this building belonged to the Myers. And he said, oh, go away. No way. So then the next time I spoke to Benny, I said, did you own some buildings in Long Meadow? And he said, sure, all 3. All 3. There's a group of buildings right in the Long Meadow, East Long Meadow line there that are gorgeous buildings.
All right, Sarah, can I interrupt you?
And he told me how he
Can I see this? Yeah.
You know, let me say this about her family. Now, she talked about Levine. That was B. Levine and Sons. They ran a haberdashery up on Main Street in Springfield. It was very well known. And the Frankels,
That's the Beverly Shop, Frankels, if you ever did any shopping in Long Meadow.
Incidentally, B. Levine was also a founder of Brookline, wasn't he?
He was one of the founders.
Yeah, and
Not
B.
B. Levine,
his son,
Harry, his son.
His son Harry. And the Myers brothers, and they were all successful. And
What's Brookline?
Brookline is the, that's a Brookline, the loungers.
Oh,
Harry Levine was a founder with another individual. You see B. Levine and the Sackowitz, there was a Phil Sachs, who was a prominent lawyer in town here.
You film?
Phil Sachs, I mean,
In
short his name.
fact, they're giving out an honor in there's a,
Yeah, at this Jewish Community Center.
you know, at the Jewish Community Center, they're having a dinner here. And I noticed that one of the honorees is being given the Philip Sachs,
Award.
Award.
yeah.
So
his name
our family was,
on.
I mean, ultimately became very prominent in the community, and we're successful people here. And
it all began with Gray's Avenue, where this.
her family, I mean, her
Where the
father
city-
brought them here, and that was.
Because you know, they came to the country, so they spent their vacations here. So this became their home.
can you want to talk a little bit about Kessler?
Well, other than of course, it's a tragedy that we have to shut. But that's I accept it as a matter of demographics and history, and it's one of the things that occurs in all in every synagogue. Look at I mean, to mention the church. Look at White Church, the old White Church. After 370 years, they've been faced with a problem of attendance and membership.
Would you have done this differently?
What would I have done? What differently about closing?
Mm-hmm.
I would have tried to keep it open a little longer, because as long as Ira Benowitz and a couple of other people were willing to finance us, it would have been appropriate. But he was the one. It was his willingness to say this is the end. He could only support it just so much, and he's no child anymore anyhow. I mean, he's in his 70s.
So what did it take? What was the budget in recent years? What does it take to keep this building open?
I would say in the neighborhood of $75,000 to $80,000 a year. We didn't. Our membership.
That includes the rabbi's salary.
I never was privy to what he got paid. So I don't know. That included, yes, I would say $75,000 to $85,000. But we raise money. This is unusual today. We raise money by auctioneering. And it comes to high holidays, and we auction off the aliyahs. And I'm the auctioneer at this point in time.
So what does an aliyah cost?
What you want to pay?
What would you get?
Well, this week, I mean, a
Rosh
couple days
Hashanah?
ago, we were $75, $75.
Can you tell us who got the aliyahs this year?
The usual,
Can you tell us?
yes. High Rabinowitz. I mean, he handed them out.
Right.
As a matter of fact, on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, since I'm the auctioneer, I had to put my mouth, I had to put my pocketbook where my mouth is, so I decided I would try to bid on the third aliyah, the fifth aliyah. So when he asked me, he was up on the bimah, so when he asked me who got the fifth, I said, I did. He said, well, why did you do that? I was going to give you the third. Well, I says, that's okay, I'll give you the fifth. So,
Who are the other names?
Who else got aliyahs?
Jerry Steinberg's children, he had two sons there, he gave them an aliyah. Jerry Steinberg had it. Bobby Foynt, and then Elon. Actually, it was the same group of people. They're the usual buyers. And as I say, they are the supporters of the synagogue.
Well, I noticed that you have a lot of, I'd say, Russian immigrants. Are they all going to go to Kadima now?
That depends upon them. They may go, but they may be priced out of the picture. It all depends. I mean, our dues were the lowest in the city.
What were they?
Well, up until last year, they were $300. And then this year they went up to $400. Last year they went up to $400. We were the cheapest, and if you came with a good story, it wasn't that much. It was could be much, much lower.
So do you think that there's a segment of the community that will go without a shul? They will leave. They will not show up any place.
That could happen. It's demographics. It has to be demographics. I like to read the social pages and see the engagements and the weddings. I think in the last year I may have seen 3 Jewish weddings. Do they settle here in town? No, they're usually out of town. The only people that are coming into the community now are the doctors primarily, and many of them are at Sinai. Well,
The Reform Synagogue.
The unreformed. It's demographics. About 20 years ago, an aunt of mine, I got a call, was very sick, and she was in the Brooklyn Jewish Hospital in Bedford-Stuyvesant.
Sure, I know it.
So I went down to pay her a visit. I took the bus down and then took the subway over to Prospect Avenue and got off at the Prospect Park station, transferred to an empty subway that was there to pick up the high school things. I got in the car and I sat there for a couple of minutes. Then later another train drew up and outpoured these high school students, and I was the only white person in that subway. But anyway, so I traveled to the Brooklyn Jewish Hospital, went upstairs to my aunt's room, and she was on the street, and I looked out the window, and I saw a Magen David in the building, somewhat similar, not as nice as the one we have in our synagogue. And I said, you have a shul there? She said, that's not a shul, it's a church. Then I found out that all those brownstones around the Brooklyn Jewish Hospital at one time were occupied by the best doctors, Jewish doctors in Brooklyn. So there was no longer the case. I said, shall I come back in the evening? She said, don't be foolish. Stay with your cousin. So we're a victim, if you want to call it that, of demographics.
But do you think that Forest Park has become a dangerous?
Now, wait a minute. Let me tell you about the Forest Park. Some of them are good friends of mine. They hate to give up those nice houses. They can walk if they want to walk. I used to walk from here until I broke my ankle, and I would have walked in '81. I live exactly a mile to the synagogue. I had a neighbor, two neighbors, Ezra Boyarsky and Mitchell Berlin. They were more or less associated with Kadima. They would walk every Shabbos. What's that? A mile and a half, approximately. So if we get the B'nai Jacob, I understand that they are September 23rd or 24th or something like that. They're going to have a meeting to determine the future of their synagogue, whether or not they want to sell it to us. I mean, to the alliance. They can walk. They're young right now. They're young enough to walk. I wouldn't say the same thing in 20 years. And when it came to the bidding, the auctioneering, we didn't hear from them at all. There were only a handful there. There were only a handful that are interested, that came over from Kadima to our show. But it's a question of money, and it's a question of demographics.
I'm asking you about the neighborhood of Forest Park. What is that like now?
Well, I have a black neighborhood over here. I have Puerto Ricans over there. I have, I don't know, that one is still white. White next door. Over there's Puerto Rican. I can tell you this, the people up in your neighborhood should come down here and live, and then they can talk all they want about the minorities. I'm a minority, literally. When I moved here 52 years ago, 51 to 50 years ago, 1956, 51 years ago, it was white. Everything was white. Today, it's mixed. Not that I'm unaccustomed to living in a mixed neighborhood, because when I lived in Six Corners, I had Irish, I had Italian, and I had black. So,
Where is Six Corners?
well, if you were to leave here, you know where the Armory, what can I say to you? It's Hancock and Eastern Avenue. It's not too far from here.
Mm-hmm.
It's where there are 3 or 4 streets meet, hence the name Six Corners. And it's where Hancock and Walnut Street intersect. It was there were black people up there, quite a few black people up there, because there was St. John's Church. It was on Hancock Street. Up on that's an old congregation, it was a flat congregational church. And back when my father had the store in 1934 to 1948, it was nothing for me to walk down Walnut Street or Eastern Avenue in the evening. And my father had this store, which later became really a drug market a number of years after he left. He was open from about 6 o'clock in the morning till 11 o'clock at night, and in that period of time he was never held up, to my knowledge. He was never held up. But today, nobody would dare walk down Hancock Street or Eastern Avenue.
We didn't ask you about children. Do you have children?
No, we didn't have
You have no children?
No, we were late, we didn't marry early in life. But we are in our 90s.
You're in your 90s. How old are you now?
I'm 91.
And your wife? We don't talk.
Something around there.
Yeah, approximately.
Who is this picture of hanging behind you?
That is Sarah's father.
Uh-huh.
And that was taken, and that's her mother.
Uh-huh.
That was, you ever hear of Lottie Katok? She was a local photographer. She was a local artist, portrait artist, Jewish. That it was taken from a newspaper picture. And it was blown at a time when Israel was under attack or something like that. It was taken at Beth Israel. Beth Israel today is a Puerto Rican church. And so is Sons of Israel. Remember our Joseph Friedman, the Cohn
Where's the-
brothers, the Heifetz brothers, and who else? But they were junk dealers.
Huh?
Junk dealers.
Oh, junk. Oh, you want to hear a funny story? There was another Joseph Friedman.
Yeah, well,
The
I just
man.
mentioned.
Oh,
Yeah.
did you tell him?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, it was in the junk business. And people used to get us confused because his wife's name was Lena, my mother's name was Lena. His oldest son's name was Jacob, my oldest brother's name was Jacob. And so they would get the school records mixed up. And it was a constant struggle all the years to separate the families and the names because they both lived here for so long.
Got
Yeah,
it.
another junk dealer
But
with
they
a
were
couple.
the rich Friedmans.
Uh-huh, yeah,
Another junk dealer was Kobrowski.
That was the big
Kobrowsky.
uh-huh.
He was also in the junk in the steel aspect. Then there was Rickless, and Rickless, they bought old burlap and old bags
People
and so
are
forth like
hungry.
that. But they were, in other words, they bought stuff that was used and that they would buy. But those are the people that I remember.
And Heifetz?
Heifetz were primarily in the paper goods business. They baled paper. It was in the old paper. They would go to factories where cardboard and so forth and so on was discarded.
Right.
So there were and the junk business was not necessarily restricted to the metal and other.
Did you say we were a horse and buggy going around collecting?
Well, the way they used to collect, peddlers were horse and wagon. I mean, the Jewish, where they sold vegetables and collected junk, went down with horse and wagon. This was done back in the 20s, 30s, and that was
Can you recall them coming down your street? And
all the time.
what would they cry out?
Well, junk and some of the fruit.
How about
And the fruit-
alte Sachen?
Well, they wouldn't say the trade was Gentile.
The trade was Gentile.
Yeah, I mean, they covered the whole city.
Uh-huh. People would come out with their junk.
And the people would kind of, if they had scrap iron or whatever, old paper, they would.
Uh-huh.
It was a horse and wagon. It was all horse and wagon. And I'll tell you what, the fruit peddlers would put up like a sign on the side of their wagon, with their prices.
We didn't talk about Christian-Jewish relations. Can you remember anything about what it was like being Jewish in a Christian world?
Well, frankly, I grew up in a Christian neighborhood, and I don't remember anti-Semitism. But
This is Beth
Sarah can tell
Israel.
you stories that involve her family. I mean,
Sarah, do you remember some stories about growing up and your family experiencing anti-Semitism?
No.
you told me about people there with your father.
All I know is my mother said in the early days, when they first settled in Springfield, and my father with his beard, my mother used to worry, because they lived in the North End, and she worried before he came home because they would catch the Jews and pull them by the beards. And besides being humiliated, besides being hurt, it was so humiliating. And if he was ever late, she was always worried. And it brought, years later, Cantor Chaitovsky, not Cantor, the grandfather Chaitovsky, used to come to our house, when he first came to Springfield, would come to our house, and sometimes he would say, Sarah a gogol mogul. That for the chazonim, they would beat up the white of an egg with milk, warm it up, and that would revive them. That's off the story. But he told me how in Europe, these gangs of hoodlums would catch him and pull him by the beard. And he cried when he told me the story. It was so humiliating, and it reminded me of what my mother said about my father, that she would worry by the time he came home, if he was late, that in that area there were a lot of hoodlums, unfortunately, at that time the Irish were pretty active. And she would worry because she was afraid they would catch him by the beard and pull it.
I'll tell you about Father Coughlin.
But other than that, we always got along well with our Gentile neighbors, and they always seemed to respect us. They had great respect for my father. You know, I told Harry how it was so cute. Father was a mole, so he would sometimes have babies at the Mercy Hospital, which was a Catholic hospital, and the nuns were the nurses. And sometimes when we walk on Main Street, if the nuns were walking along and they saw my father, they'd all come and huddle around him. They loved him. So there was a good relationship between the Jews and the Catholic Church, as far as I could see, certainly Mercy Hospital. They seemed to respect him and like him. And all they knew of him was, of course, what they saw at the...
I'll tell you, there was a period of time...
I'm just trying to think. I don't... we always had Gentile friends living. My brothers we went to school with them, and they were frequently at our home. They were welcome, and you know, the folks felt that it was a good idea to mingle. I never witnessed any anti-Semitism myself, and I worked with Catholics, you know, for quite a while. No, I never.
In fact, two of our best friends now are Catholics.
And when they sold the original Beth Israel synagogue to a black group, the black group insisted that my father be there at the burning of the mortgage because they trusted him. Dad did own some property, and frequently he had black tenants. And very often I can remember when they couldn't pay their rent, they'd come to the house, and not only did they pay the rent, they'd borrow some money in order to have something to eat. So that there was, at least in my family, we had a good relationship. And the only fear that I heard my folks express was in those early days when the men didn't wear beards at that time. They were all clean shaven, and father had a beard. And for the hoodlums in the neighborhood, because we lived in a mixed neighborhood of both blacks and Irish.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about Father Coughlin.
I can think in the late 30s, about 37, 38, 39, Father Charles Coughlin was broadcasting in Michigan, and eventually he started to sound anti-Semitic. And the Jews began, Sunday afternoon was his period of broadcasting, and it became, you know, you listened to him, but you dreaded to listen to him. And I think the Jews were, on the whole, and I think throughout the country, were very fearful of his addresses, because he eventually began to blame the Jews for the Depression and so forth. But it was... a scary time. Well, then the war came, and I mean, eventually, I think the hierarchy, the Catholic hierarchy, told him to shut down, and but for a period of a couple of years, he was considered a menace by the Jewish population.
Yeah.
Sarah.
This is a circumcision celebration of Samuel K. Friedman,
I have the date
son of a Rabbi Joseph Friedman
and Mrs. Lena.
and Lena Friedman, and they were the rabbi of Grays Avenue Synagogue in Springfield, Massachusetts.
You can read this here, circumcision celebration, verse of Samuel K. Friedman, August 28, 08, son of, I guess I'll say this right, Grace Avenue Springfield, Mass. It was really, they said, I always understood that this was the yard connecting the houses with the synagogue. That was in the synagogue was next.
The picture where,
Oh, that's Beth Israel Synagogue. They were celebrating something. And
is that the one where
This is Mrs. Shankoff, Rabbi Shankoff's wife, and I don't know.
On the far right.
From Waterbury. Incidentally, you know, then Waterbury is now a sort of a Jewish
And
community.
there's my mother, my father's in
A
it.
couple of yeshivas.
Your father up there?
This is my
Waterbury,
this is my father here,
We know the rabbi.
and this is my uncle, Mr. Levine.
What was his first name, Mr.
Until a
Levine?
couple years ago, we used to go
Beryl.
down to
Beryl Levine.
Beryl.
Miami Beach.
That's we always called him Beryl. So what would that be in English?
One of
Beryl.
Yeah.
The leaders of the thing was.
And which one is your mother?
There.
Excuse me,
Your mother.
And,
Lena,
Where?
Oh.
yeshivas.
right here.
Uh-huh.
That's my mother.
Her
This
mother
is
was one
a
of the
Reuben,
founders
a
of
Hyman
Jewish
Reuben.
nursing home.
I knew his name. You know, after a while you forget them. And this is my uncle, Beryl Levine.
She used to go out
This
snoring.
is my aunt, Sophie Glazier.
Try to get
Mr. Myers,
coal.
George Myers. My aunt, Mrs. Levine. My uncle, Mr.
What's her first name? Don't give Mrs. What's her first name?
Boschel.
Bashel, so
And what's this man here with the goatee?
he was one of the. From one of the shuls.
Was that,
You know, with
was
so
that
many-
possible?
How about this fellow here?
That's my uncle Julius, Julius Glazier.
Yeah, Bernie-
And this is
Bernie-
Mrs.
Bernie-
Shankoff.
Bernie
This
Glazer?
here is Mrs. Shankoff.
No, that was his father.
This was a rabbi. I can't remember now which one he was. this is quite a few
that
years
Siegel,
ago.
Sarah?
Huh?
That Rabbi Siegel? Siegel?
No,
Oh, Gordon.
no, because Siegel.
How about this lady here on the far left?
I don't know. This lady right here is Mrs. Kingsburg, Kingsburg. It was taken prior to 1938.
Gentile cemetery.
Front row, left to right.
Visiting
Buchheim, Sherman, Vidlansky, Savitsky, Levine, Friedman. And Friedman.
Yeah, that's my mother.
Second row, left to right. Rickless.
Mesdames,
Yeah, Rickless,
Nicholas, Sisiski, Baver, Cone, Albert, Kingsburg.
Jewish nursing home.
Well, this is a choir. As you can see, the men wearing the hats are the chazonim. The men without the hats were members of the choir. Now, why did they not wear hats? No, they were socialists. I don't know.
Okay, so
I
this is
know.
Rabbi Siegel.
And the first was Rabbi Siegel. The second one. Oh, I got the
Which one is your father? This one?
There's my father.
He's the one with the van.
This is Reverend Falk,
Okay.
Samuel Falk,
There were several more.
and my father.
Well, he was rabbi at which synagogue?
He was in the Rosh Hashanah, that one on
B'nai
White
Jacob?
Yeah,
Street.
there were several.
Was it?
Moylan, the
What was the
fellows
Rosh Hashanah called, Harry?
Huh?
Rosh Hashanah,
That's the Sons of Israel.
Sons of Israel.
Sons of Israel. Oh, that disbanded completely.